The echoes of forgotten warriors whisper through these shattered stones, a testament to what was lost.
They came from the cold edge of the world, from lands of pine forests, frozen rivers, and long ships cutting through iron-gray seas. These men were forged by hardship Vikings who had raided monasteries, battled kings, and followed river routes deep into the heart of Eastern Europe. Yet their journey would not end in plunder or settlement. Instead, it would carry them thousands of miles south to a city unlike anything they had ever seen. Constantinople rose from the water like a vision from legend. Its walls stretched farther than the eye could follow. Its churches glittered with gold mosaics. Its markets overflowed with silk, spices, silver, and wine. For warriors accustomed to wooden halls and smoky fires, this city felt unreal rich, powerful, and guarded by the might of an empire that had survived when others had fallen. To the Norse, it was simply Miklagard, the great city. At first, their relationship with this empire was written in blood. Viking fleets appeared without warning, their warriors testing the city's defenses through raids and sudden wars. Treaties were signed, broken, and rewritten. Yet Tovetim undisformed. The empire needed fighters who feared no death. The Vikings needed silver, purpose, and glory greater than simple raiding could offer. Slowly, these northern warriors began selling something more valuable than plunder there: loyalty. They fought as mercenaries, hired blades in a foreign land. Their axes became tools of imperial ambition. Byzantine commanders took note. These men did not melt into local politics. They did not scheme for titles. They fought, they endured, and when paid, they stayed true. Then came the crisis. In the late 10th century, the empire teetered on the edge of disaster. A powerful general rose in rebellion, seizing much of Asia Minor and marching toward Constantinople itself. The emperor faced betrayal from within a fractured army, and the real possibility that his throne and his life would soon be lost. Traditional forces were not enough. He needed men who would not hesitate, who owed him nothing but their oath and their pay. So he turned north. A deal was struck across frozen rivers and distant courts. From the lands of the Rus came 6,000 warriors battle-hardened, disciplined, and hungry for gold and honor. When they arrived in the winter cold, their presence alone shifted the balance of power. They advanced without fear, smashing enemy lines with axes and shields, breaking the rebellion in brutal, decisive clashes. What had seemed like the empire's end became a sudden reversal of fortune. Victory came swiftly. The rebellion collapsed. The emperor survived, but something else was born in the aftermath. These warriors were not sent home. Instead, they were kept closer than any soldiers before them. They became the emperor's personal guard, sworn not to a general or a faction, but to the throne itself. They stood watch outside imperial chambers. They marched at the front of armies. They carried massive axes that became symbols of both protection and terror. Their loyalty became legendary. When emperors fell, they did not switch sides easily. When conspiracies brewed, the guards remained unmoved. They were foreigners in language, faith, and custom, but that distance made them trusted. They had no family ties to exploit, no local ambitions to corrupt them. Their honor was simple: protect the emperor, obey orders, and be rewarded. Over the years, their ranks changed. New warriors arrived from Scandinavia, from the river cities of the east, and later even from England. Some came as pagans and left as Christians. Others stayed only long enough to earn fortunes and stories that would echo back home in sagas. For more than 3 centuries, these men stood between emperors and death. Vikings became imperial guards. Raiders became protectors of a Christian empire. And in the halls of Constantinople, far from northern snow and longships, the clash of axes wrote one of the most unlikely chapters in medieval history. Axes, armor, and absolute loyalty, the palace corridors of Constantinople were never truly silent. Even at dawn, when the city still clung to sleep, there were echoes, sandals on marble, the distant chant of priests, the flutter of pigeons trapped beneath the golden domes. Eirik had learned to listen for those sounds. They told him when the emperor was awake, when messengers were moving, when something in the court's delicate machinery had shifted. He stood his watch at the bronze gate, axe resting against his shoulder, chainmail biting into his collarbone. Around him, other Varangians held the line, pale jaints among silk-robed courtiers. They were no longer the wild band that had marched into the city decades earlier. They were fewer now, about 3,000 men, but each one was chosen, tested, and sworn. Above them all was the Akalauthus, a Greek noble appointed by the emperor himself. But it was the Varangian captains who commanded the ranks. Men who spoke in the clipped tones of the north and enforced discipline with iron stares rather than parchment orders. Their task had never changed. Protect the emperor. They guarded palace gates that glowed red in the morning sun. They stood beside the throne, statues with breathing chests. At night, they watched the corridors outside the imperial bedchamber, listening for footsteps that should not be there. And when the emperor rode to war, they rode with him close enough to feel the heat of his horse, close enough to die for him, which many had. Eirik had seen it firsthand. The blood darkening marble floors after a failed coup. The way a dagger vanished beneath a Varangian shield before it ever reached purple cloth. The emperor rarely noticed these things. He was a man who lived in storms of politics and prayer, and he trusted the guard to keep death at arm's length. They were built for it. When the Varangians formed for battle, they looked less like men than a moving wall. Chainmail shirts clinked like rain on roof tiles. Some wore lamella armor, rows of iron plates laced together so tightly they moved as one skin. Their helmets were simple, conical things, scarred by blows that would have split lesser skulls. And then there were the shields, broad, heavy slabs of wood rimmed with iron, painted in the old colors of the north. But it was the axes that made crowds fall silent. Two-handed weapons, long as a man was tall, with crescent blades that caught the light like cold fire. The Byzantines whispered about them in the markets. The axe-bearing barbarians, they said, half in fear, half in awe. Eirik had carried a sword once. He had traded it for the axe after his first campaign. A sword was a gentleman's weapon, quick, precise, and deadly in the hands of the trained. An axe was something else entirely. It did not care about finesse. It crushed shields, shattered bones, and tore cavalrymen from their saddles as if they were children on wooden horses. The guard did not fight like heroes in the old epics. They fought as a machine. When horsemen charged, Varangians knelt in the front rank, shields locked, while the second line raised axes overhead. At the moment of impact, they surged forward together, not shouting. Not breaking formation, just the dull roar of iron on iron and the wet sound of armor giving way. Eirik remembered Beroya. The Pechenegs had ringed themselves with wagons, a fortress of wood and iron. John, the second Komnenos himself, had led the assault. His face pale, beneath the weight of a gilded helmet. The regular troops hesitated at the barricade. Arrows poured down. Men scrimed. Then the Varangians stepped forward. Eirik had swung his axe until his arms burned, hacking at wagon wheels, tearing planks loose, dragging defenders screaming into the mud. When the wall broke, they poured inside like floodwater. It was over in minutes. When the dust settled, the Emperor stood amid shattered wagons and broken bodies, the guard forming a ring around him. That was what they were for. Yet their reputation was not built on slaughter alone. It was built on something rarer, loyalty so complete it baffled those who watched from afar. Anna Komnene, the Emperor's own daughter, would later write that the Varangians passed loyalty from father to son like an heirloom. Eirik believed it. His own father had died before ever seeing Constantinople. But the oath he had sworn in the north still echoed in his ears. Never betray the man you serve. They were outsiders in this city. They had no cousins in the Senate, no brothers-in-law in the tax offices. They did not plot. They did not whisper in candlelit halls. Court politics slid off them like rain off armor. They had one master. That was why Manzikert still haunted them. The veterans spoke of it in low voices over wine, of how Emperor Romanos IV had marched east to halt the Seljuk raids, only to find his army unraveling before the first arrows were loosed, how entire units had melted away into the hills, how the Emperor's banners had stood alone in a sea of dust. The Varangians had formed their ring around him as they always did. They could have fled. No one would have blamed them, but they did not. They held until their shields were splintered and their axes too heavy to lift. They fell one by one, bodies piling around the imperial standard. When the sun set, there were no Varangians left alive on that field. Not one had surrendered. Eirik had not been there. He had been too young, still learning the weight of the axe, but he carried the story as if he had. Every time he took his post, every time he tightened the strap of his helmet, he remembered the men who had died in a ring around their emperor. Nameless to the world but immortal to the guard, the corridors were stirring now. Somewhere beyond the bronze gate, the emperor was rising. Eirik lifted his axe, resting its haft against his shoulder, and took a breath of incense-scented air. He was a stranger in a foreign empire, and he would die before letting harm come to the man he served. Kings, crusaders, and the fall of the Guard when Eirik finally left Constantinople. His beard was streaked with grey, and his purse was heavy enough to drag his belt crooked. He had given the empire to decades of his life, years of standing watch beneath golden domes, of marching behind emperors whose names blurred together like coins in a cup. He was not alone. Ships leaving the Golden Horn were thick with Varangians heading home, their armor polished, their cloaks dyed in scarlet, their axes inlaid with gold filigree. Service in the Guard was brutal, bones broke, friends vanished in foreign fields. Yet it paid better than any king in the north could afford. When these men returned, they were not simply veterans, they were legends. Among them was a young exile named Harold Sigurdsson. Eirik met Harold on the docks in 1034, a tall, sharp-eyed man, barely old enough to grow a full beard. He had arrived with 500 warriors at his back, men who had followed him out of Norway after his brother's defeat. They expected glory immediately. Instead, the Byzantines sent them to fight pirates. Arab raiders infested the coasts, slipping from hidden coves to torch villages. Harold hunted them without mercy. Eirik heard tales of night attacks, of ships rammed and boarded under moonlight, of prisoners stripped of weapons and dignity alike. Then came Sicily, where the General George Maniacs was carving the island out of Muslim hands. Sitifeel. Harold's men filled their packs with silver and silk. By the time they returned to Constantinople, Harold was no longer a boy. He walked with the confidence of a man who had survived too many battles to doubt himself. But even in the Varangian Guard, ambition could be dangerous. In 1042, rumors swirled through the barracks that Harold had grown too rich. Tobold. He was accused of keeping more than his share of tax revenues, embezzlement, the Greeks called it. One night, he was simply gone, swallowed by the palace dungeons. The city exploded days later. The emperor had banished his adoptive mother Zoe, claiming sole rule. The people answered with fire and fury. Crowds stormed the palace gates, and among them marched Varangians who still remembered Harold as one of their own. Eirik was not there, but he later saw the scars in the marble, long grooves where axes had bitten stone. Harold was freed, put at the head of the assault, and the palace was taken in a storm of blood. The emperor was blinded and sent to a monastery. Zoe was restored, and Harold walked free. Within weeks he was gone, slipping north with a fortune in gold and a bride from the house of Kiev. He would return to Norway and claim the throne. Remembered by history as Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king. By then, the Guard itself was changing. After 1066, the docks filled with a different sort of exile. The Normans had conquered England, and Anglo-Saxon warriors fled east by the thousands. They brought their families, their priests, even their language. Within a generation, English voices echoed through the Varangian barracks. By the 12th century, it was said that English was the Guards' native tongue. But the Normans followed them. At Dyrrhachium in 1081, the Varangians stood against fellow sons of the north, men who had traded longships for heavy cavalry and iron discipline. The battle was chaos. At first, the Varangians broke the Norman lines, chasing them toward the sea. They chased too far. Cut off from the main army, surrounded by crossbowmen and pikemen, they fell back to a nearby church, barricading the doors. The Normans piled wood against the walls and set it alight. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained inside but blackened stone and the charred shapes of men who had once been invincible. It was a massacre. Eirik was old by then, his fighting days behind him, but the news struck him harder than any axe blow. The Guard had always buried its dead, but never so many at once, never so helplessly. Still, the Empire endured, the Varangians endured, until the Crusaders came. The year 1204 was meant to be a moment of triumph. Christian armies passing through Constantinople on their way to reclaim the Holy Land. Instead, greed and betrayal poisoned everything. Deals were broken, promises turned to threats when the Crusaders stormed the walls. 5,000 Varangians held the gates. They fought in the old ways, swinging by with blood. Fires raged through the streets. Churches were looted. The city that had dazzled the world for centuries screamed like any other conquered town. Eirik was not there to see it. He was long dead by then, buried somewhere beneath northern soil with his axe laid across his chest. But those who survived told the same story. When Emperor Alexios V fled the burning city, the Varangians looked at one another and lowered their weapons. They had sworn to protect the emperor. Without him, the oath meant nothing. They laid down their axes. And just like that, the Varangian guard vanished from history. It would be revived decades later, after Constantinople was retaken, but never again with the same fire. The world was changing. Gunpowder was on the horizon. Kingdoms grew stronger than empires. By the 15th century, the last Varangians had slipped into obscurity. Yet their legacy endures. For over 300 years, Viking warriors crossed half the known world to guard emperors who spoke another language, worshipped another god, and ruled from a city of gold. They began as pagan raiders. They ended as kingmakers. And in the long, strange story of the Middle Ages, no brotherhood was ever quite like the Varangian Guard.
Framsiglum bræður, fylgja okkar bani. Óðinn gefur og sigr.